funny jokes and funny stories were all a part of the history. I remember nearly every one of Howard's letters in the family always had a little story at the end of it. I think we ought to kind of revive that custom.
Was it Howard's Ellie?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's
okay.
kind of a neat custom. Yeah. Lois?
Excuse me, could you guys introduce yourselves? I
Oh,
think it
okay.
would really help,
Yeah.
and tell where your father was in the line of children.
Okay. Oliver was the fourth child. The first two children were the boys who came from Nebraska. And Nellie was the third born child. And Nellie never married, and Nellie was a missionary in Mexico for a while, and she finally had enough of that and got to her. She came back and she helped the two people on the farm. And my dad, Oliver, was the fourth one. And so I was then, because they married, Oliver finished Chino High School in 1910 after having worked and everything there.
But you're going to introduce who else is speaking
Okay.
right now.
So he was the fourth one, and he went on to USC and so forth. This is my oldest kid. This is Kathy. Kathy lives at Atascadero and married to a real interesting guy named, what's his name?
George.
George Asdale. And they have a daughter, and they're currently entertaining for a year a girl from Germany who is about the same age as Christina. And this is my sister Lois. Lois lives here in San Diego, and she married some sailor, I don't know, going by in San Diego. And they've had 4 children and a wonderful life in San Diego. And my daughter Sue, who lives at Bishop, California, and is a librarian and a mama, and a lot of other things. And Lois's daughter, Juliet, over here, who's a dancer, and we had fun yesterday watching her do her dances and so forth.
And
down
then
in
several
Old Town.
other things.
I was the oldest grandchild, being the first. I think my mom and dad were the first ones married. And I was born in Los Angeles, California, and went home to Pasadena, where my mother's folks lived. And Dad became a Methodist preacher, and there was a custom in 1910 and 14 and 15. The bishop moved young preachers almost every other year. My mother became a very good mover. She had boxes all organized and numbered and stuff, so she knew she was going to move in another 2 years. And somehow in those days, they didn't keep a lot of things that they just couldn't do without. Like we have so many things we just can't do without. We have a whole garage full and can't get our car in there sometimes. Okay, let's see, Dan Oliver. Okay, what do I remember about Dan Oliver? Well, he loved the outdoors, and we went on lots of hikes. We did the John Muir Trail hike, he and I. At least the north half of it, I don't think we ever got around to the south half, but that was a good exercise. He always had Boy Scouts in each of his churches, and he was an outgoing kind of person that always loved the community. And when he was assigned at Laverne, California, which was his 4th assignment, I think, as a preacher, Methodist preacher, he immediately got into the town and became an organizer and got enthusiastic about the town. This was a little town that most of the families grew oranges, and he had orange groves all around. And he and a lawyer friend started the Lions Club there, and he did lots of things like that. He was on the Planning Commission in Laverne, and eventually on the city council, and they had a mayoral city council, which means that each city council member takes a turn as mayor of the town. And they named a street after him, like they did all the other mayors in town of Laverne. And Laverne since has changed a lot, but I've moved back to Laverne and enjoy it really much.
We live just a few blocks from Butterfield Avenue.
Oh,
Okay, Dad Oliver, let's see, he was very much interested in the fact that preachers are married couples, but really don't take a whole lot of responsibilities whether marriage is going to be any good or not. And Dad felt that as a part of the church responsibility, it was really important for preachers to help families get started and get started right. And he found that most preachers and most families in 1920s didn't never talk about the intimate side of relationships together as a family, as a couple. And so he went to work, and he and Mother developed a counseling book for preachers, and he called it, of all things, Marriage and Sexual Harmony. And this is a copy of the book.
Hold it over so I can.
And
Yeah.
I thought I'd pass it around too.
Is that the only one he wrote?
oh no,
There's
they
a
enlarged
hard-
it
I
a
have
little bit later.
one.
Yeah, his
There's a hardcover.
Show the other book,
PhD
too.
thesis was something Parenting problems of adolescence, was it?
Well, his
Love problems of adolescence.
love problems of adolescence was his thesis for his doctorate.
He
And
was
then he
quite
did
a bit
this
ahead
one,
of his
Sex, Life, and
time.
Marriage.
Yeah, that's the one that he sent me.
What fascinated,
I think we have one also.
I was really
Is there another
indignant
story
that he
there,
sent
or-
that.
when my brother was married in the 60s, he went for premarital counseling, and the guy said, this is a pamphlet that even though it's written a long time ago, I feel that it's just a wonderful thing, and the guy handed it to him and says, oh, my grandfather wrote it.
I had that experience at Berkeley. There was I mentioned my name, Butterfield, and they said, "Oh, did you write the book on sex?" You know, because that was what the name
Well, and
is.
what's-
I remember about it.
What's fun is that when I give it to my kids to read, they look at it and they go, well, gosh, how long ago was this written? Because it really talks about just the basic stuff.
The
Equal
relationship.
sharing of relationship, and that's the most important thing.
What a treasure
You
and
know
a
what-
gift it is to have a wonderful relationship. Well, Dad, out of that book came a lot of interesting things. I was telling somebody today, our life is full of miracles in our Butterfield family, both in my family and the rest of ours. The counselor for Dad at USC to finish his master's degree was a lady who had come from Columbia University. And her mentor and special person at Columbia University was heading up a committee to have a marriage and family council institute at Columbia University to help families in New York to do better things about the families and improve the whole situation. They were looking for a ministerial person to come and do that. And the lady, I can't remember her name now, from USC, recommended my dad, and Dad was given a fellowship, $1,000 a month program for 4 years to be able to finish his doctorate degree if he wished to do that. So he couldn't pass it up. No way in the world he could have passed up something as wonderful as that. So Dad moved off to New York City real quick. He resigned
Didn't you
and
two
took
guys
a leave
live
of absence.
with, did
Pardon
you
me?
live back there too?
Well, just a minute. Dad took a leave of absence from the church, and he had to go on council with the bishop to get permission to actually leave. And the bishop was congratulating him, and so Dad went off on the train to New York City. But we had penny poor. I mean, we just had a preacher's salary, and we just didn't have any savings. And to get Mother to New York City so they could be together was a big struggle. And I have copies of letters they wrote back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to finally borrowed money from insurance and everything. If somebody else loaned them some money, we finally got a chair car ride from Mom to New York City. Well, then Lois and I lived in Monterey Park in a rented house, $35 a month, up above the little park there. And Aunt Nellie came and stayed with us to help us get everything put together. And we stayed there for 2 years so that Lois could finish 8th grade and I could finish high school at Alhambra High School. Then as I was finishing high school, the problem was, how are we going to get to New York, put the family together? Well, miracles happen. My Uncle Will, as my mother's brother-in-law, was a doctor out in that little town of Randsburg, out in the far desert. No, that's not there. There was a yellow ester mine at Randsburg that was just about pooped out. They almost got all, but he was still the only physician for miles and miles around the desert country. So that when they had a fatality, he phoned down to Los Angeles, and a man came out, a field representative from Pierce Brothers Mortuary. And so John came out this day, but he didn't bring his fishing rod, he didn't bring his rifle or anything. They usually went hunting, and they usually went fishing, because that's what Will was out there, because he liked that country. And he said, Uncle Will said, John, what's the problem? You've got something wrong. What, you didn't bring anything along? He said, well, we have this family in Los Angeles that wants to bury their father in New Jersey. And we can't find anybody to go one way on the train from Los Angeles to New York. And my uncle said, I have just the person to do it. So Lois and I went on the train, and we were in the chair car, of course, but the conductor was very solicitous. He was very concerned about us because we were escorting our casket. So Mom and Dad greeted us in there, and that's the way. I stayed in New York City for a couple of years, and Dad went on there and finished his doctor's degree. And then he returned to Los Angeles because this is really home, and this is where he really wanted to work. And eventually he became instructor. Well, first of all, he was chaplain of men at the Chino Institution for Men, which is a brand new institution for, quote, first offenders, unquote. But I think they've moved on from that. And then he was there 5 years, and then he went on to counseling. He was went to do lecture work and so on. And he taught a little while at college where you were?
No, he actually, for years and years, he was a chartered professor at Mount Sac.
Yeah.
No, before that though. He taught.
It was after
That was
Was
later.
that
That was
after?
later.
When he was at Mount Sac for
Yeah.
15 years and they retired from that. That's where he really retired. But they lived in Laverne all that time. And I still go by the house every day on 5th Street where they used to live. They had a little office on the side. House is still there. Then he went on.
He married their mother and dad.
Yes.
And
Alice
Lois and I were flower girls.
That's right.
And another
That's
interesting
right.
story is I think he even baptized, didn't he baptize mother?
Oh, yeah, while he was in Laverne.
Oh,
He
yeah.
baptized our mother Ina.
My wife was going
She was
after
a
her
little
mother
girl.
died. This is like in 1950 something. After her mother died, we were going through the things in her mother's papers in the bottom of the trunk. Here's a baptismal certificate. No, it was a baptismal
Baptismal
certificate.
certificate.
That my dad had baptized Ina, my wife,
Oh.
when she was a little baby. They had to have her baptized, and they didn't go to church very regular. The Methodist church in Laverne was where they went to church, and there my dad had baptized
And
her.
you never
How
know
funny.
that all that time.
The miracles keep going on.
Can I kibitz a little bit
Yeah.
to
Sure.
the story? Dad didn't tell the part about going from ministry to counseling.
Yeah.
Was like, he was a minister in the church in Laverne, and he talked from the pulpit about women having a say about how many children they have. You know, we've all inherited that. I think it came from Grandma Mercy. Anything, good or bad,
Sure.
we get teary-eyed and cranky voice, but I was very embarrassed about that when I was a child, but I understood it later, because Grandma always seemed to be crying. But Grandpa felt very strongly about these things and talked about how women should have a say about how many children they had and whether they had children. And he had a very revolutionary idea that teenagers should go to camp together and talk about their dating things and their relationship. And I don't know how many of you are aware of what it was like in those days, but they had boys camps and girls
Oh,
camps,
yeah.
and never the twain shall meet. And I think I remember a story about the Methodist Church has kind of a, if they're unhappy with their minister, they all meet together with the district superintendent and the bishop and talk about what are they going to do with this guy. And they were very close to, this man doesn't belong in our ministry. And Laverne was a very conservative place. And I always felt like he got out. He was way ahead of his time. And he got out before they threw him out, which we were always sort of proud of, like a special thing.
Well, when Dad came back to Laverne to live and teach at Mount Sac, they didn't go to the Laverne Methodist Church anymore. They went over to Pomona, the Methodist Church over there. And Lois was married over there. Lois and Paul were married in the Pomona Church. But the Pomona Fellowship was different. Of course, by that time, another generation of people had moved in out of Laverne. And there was a time in the 1950s when the orange trees all became sick and died real quick. They called it quick decline, and many families had 40, 50, 100-acre orange groves, and they were wonderful income and all that, and all of a sudden disappeared within 10 years' time. Just flew away. They discovered that the Agricultural Service finally determined that most of the trees that had died were what they call sour root stalk oranges. And in other words, they were propagated from the little seedling of sour root oranges, and then they were budded over to whatever orange they wanted to use. But the sour root stalk were very subject to a virus that was carried by aphids that was brought by the ants that came to the orange trees. It's kind of pathetic, but they found it out after it all happened. Of course, they pulled up the orange trees and planted houses in Laverne.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a different town now. I was told by the lady who wrote the history of Laverne recently that in those days, in the 20s and 30s, the Methodists really ran the town. Now, this is the town that was established by the Church of the Brethren in 1889. The Church of the Brethren was a very big, influential thing, but they were busy running their orange groves, and they let the Methodists run the town. So there's streets named after all the Methodist mayors. There was Romick and Durward and Blue and some other towns like that. They're all Methodist. Now the Brethren are back in charge. But I really enjoy living in Hillcrest. That's good.
What are some of your memories, Lois?
Well, I loved being a preacher's kid. There's a lot of people who grow up and everybody's watching us and judging us, and that's a little downer to them. But I loved being a preacher's kid, and I had a great set of parents and a big brother I had followed around. I probably wished I wouldn't some, but anyway. And I really thought it was a grand idea there's been a lot of fallout through the years because being a Butterfield, other people catch on and say, oh, did you know so-and-so, or do you know so-and-so? And it turns out maybe they know the same relative I have, or they knew my dad or one of my uncles or somebody. I wanted to say when the time when my dad went back to New York and then my mother joined him, and Chuck and I were at Monterey Park, bless her heart, Aunt Nellie was there cooking and laundering and doing all the things. But Uncle Harold McClellan came over on weekends. He didn't live far away. And he helped do stuff too, the big heavy stuff, whatever it was, gardening or fixing things. But one thing about, charming thing about him was he loved to sing sea chanties, English sea chanties. And he'd always sing these English sea chanties. Every now and then I'll hear one on a classical station, and it just brings back memories of Uncle Harold just singing away and making jokes, and he was very
Where did you learn those?
Where did he learn it?
Yeah.
Well, he was a school principal, and I imagine he didn't tell me where he learned them.
No.
They weren't very long, at least the first ones, but they were fun. They were just good folk music. And so we really owe them both a great thank you for keeping us going and keeping our folks.
How old were you when your folks were back in New York?
I was just
8th grade?
Just graduated
finishing
from
8th grade, and he was just finishing
High school.
So you went to high school in New York? then?
Yeah, I'd done 1.5 a semester here, but we had we moved out the middle of the year.
Yeah.
So I had 4.5 years of high school. But,
Where in New York?
well, it was,
New York City?
yeah, it was New York City, and of course Dad was going to Columbia University, so whatever apartments we had were within walking distance. He didn't have a car.
We lived at 125th of Riverside Drive, if anybody knows New York City is. And halfway up the Hudson River area, and not very far from Riverside Church.
I've never been to New York, so it doesn't mean anything to
No.
me.
Well, the first year we lived on 118th Street
Yeah,
and something.
that's right, I lived in 118th.
And it was our first experience with cockroaches
No.
and bed bugs at night.
There's where he found those bed bugs he used to tell us
And the hot
about.
summer nights that you just were hotter than the days, and this was why rich people could send their kids off to camp somewhere in the woods for 2 months. And it was a whole different experience. I remember once waiting somewhere for a bus or something, and there was a park bench nearby, a wooden one, and a collection of maybe 4 or 5 Afro-American boys were there. They weren't paying any attention to me, but one of them had a stick, and one had some rocks, and one had something else. And they started beating on this wooden resonant bench, and their rhythms were just very intricate. They were way beyond just dum da dum da dum. And one guy was doing that. It was like a jazz thing, except it was all percussion. And I immediately I thought it was wonderful, and I wish there was someone else to share it with me. It lasted maybe 4 minutes, and I had in my head, thousands of years ago, these people around a campfire somewhere, and somebody over on the side, a group of people beating out on the rocks with sticks and stones and stuff like that. It was tremendous. But I went to a private school there. The public schools were not, my father thought they weren't anything to shout about. So Columbia had its own experimental school, so if you think I'm weird, it's because
I always wondered.
Now you know.
I think Lois was an accelerated student.
Well,
It seemed that that's what I heard in the
Well,
family.
you skipped a grade though, didn't you, Mom?
I skipped 3rd grade, I think, and part of the 6th grade, but it meant I was the youngest girl in the class, which meant by the time you got to 6th and 7th and 8th grade, you felt kind of like you were saying, wait for me. But anyway, in New York, where were we? Anyway,
Well,
so One nice thing that
Yeah.
happened while we were back, one nice Butterfield thing that happened while we were back there is Harold McClellan, I think, decided to get some
Yeah.
extra education. I believe it was at Columbia, but I'm
Oh, yeah.
not sure.
When he came back there.
So they were back there a year or two, and they just had 2 little boys.
Now, there was a picture last night that I
Yeah.
wanted to ask David about. And
Yeah.
it was David and John at Columbia.
Yeah.
Probably.
And I had, he said his dad got his PhD there.
I think he worked on it
Doctorate.
years, he had it figured out that it could be back there for a
And
year.
it was neat to have Thanksgiving
Yeah.
and
Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
Christmas.
Family
1 or 2
again.
years, I remember. And that was a lot of fun and to have family back there. My dad also, after while he was working at Columbia, he also part-time shared an office to do some counseling work to get some more income in, because the apartment's rent was rather high for those days, for us anyway. And he shared it with a Jewish man who ran a very nice summer camp, which it used 2 months, up in Vermont, called Camp Kokosing, was for mostly Jewish families sent there, high school, teenage boys.
It was in Vermont.
It was in
Yeah,
Vermont.
Kokosing was it?
And so he talk about miracles. He came in one day and said, I usually have on my staff a lot of counselors and helpers, and many of them are college kids. But he said, the person I was depending on for the nature counselor can't come. What am I going to do? And my dad, who spent many years at Y camps and things, being a nature study
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
said, you think I could help? Would I fit in? And Bill, whatever was in Rutherford, he didn't care if his counselors were Jewish or non-Jewish, as long as they did their job. And he said, Oliver, I think that'd be wonderful. So I forget what they did with the office during the summer. They must have sublet it out or something, because they came back to it in the fall. But anyway, he went up there for 3 or 4 summers while I was back there. They had a wonderful time. And
Did you get to go then? Your whole family? No, just he went.
just he went.
Oh.
It wasn't that big a miracle. Miracle for your dad.
Anyway.
Yeah, really.
But it's been a good life, and I know there was lots more I was going to say, but I.
Well, now,
there
was he a
time for
gardener?
everything.
Was he a gardener too, just picking up patterns from these other people? Did he
No.
Not that much, but my mother.
Yeah,
had
grandma.
three daughters, so
Grandma,
I don't have
yeah.
any.
Yeah, mother was a gardener.
She
Mercy
would
was a
go
gardener.
out in the yard wherever we lived and work, and we had a deal after I got adopted on this one. I would do the housework and some of the cooking so that she would have time to be out there and then wouldn't have to come in all hot and tired this morning.
But I think the value of growing things and canning
Yeah,
things and
yeah.
all that kind of thing was something that he really believed in, just in his,
Oh, yeah.
in the nature, in the genes.
And the year that I was born, they bought the place at Palomar. And this was sort of later in the story, but when they lived, I guess they must have, were they living in Laverne?
No, no.
Or were they in
Yeah,
San
they
Diego
lived-
then?
No, first they lived in Laverne,
Yeah.
and they would take 2.5 hours each way to
Yeah.
drive up.
But they bought the place in
Later.
Palomar, and I think he did a lot with sort of growing trees and things
Well,
like that.
didn't Dad and Mother live at La Mesa or someplace like that? Because
They
this
were
neighbor,
at
They bought this-
No, but they were sometimes. Do we?
they bought the Palomar
There was
place
a
off from
time
a
when they were
neighbor.
at Lindsay though. In
Lindsay?
San Diego, or in San Diego.
Lindsay?
Well,
Lindsay's up in the
well, what
valley.
No, no, it was,
No, no,
I
Lindsay.
have the wrong place.
What happened?
But there was a time early that they
When
lived
they
in San
lived there.
Diego.
Well, what happened was, as I remember it.
yeah. Well, you got it.
While my dad was in Laverne and at the prison, not in
Yeah.
prison, but
Good
they
job.
really are.
I think he actually was the first
Uh,
chaplain, wasn't he?
Because they
And
were first
created that
offenders,
whole.
a lot of people they could send out on as in work teams to the
Yeah.
national forests and
Yeah,
this
there
and
you
that. They were sending a bunch up to Palomar once a month, and they wanted their chaplain to be there because it was over a weekend, and they wanted Sunday services. So he and Mom started going up to Palomar. I've never been there before, and they would have services for the fellas the prisoners in the camp. And then there was a local group of people who lived up there who always met in the little county park down there where our cabin is on Sundays. And they loved to have any kind of visiting clergy come and help them on Sundays. So he got acquainted with this couple that later on he bought they bought the cabin from. It was a little old couple who, the man had lived there since 1924, and this was in the early 40s. And he'd married, and they had this little place up there. The man got sick and died, and the woman then moved to San Diego, but whoever the authorities were said, you can't get welfare to live on and also own property somewhere, even if it's, so she had to sell it. Well, by this time, my dad had moved to San Diego. Was he having moved here?
He's teaching college
Yes,
down
they-
here.
they-
Well, I don't know.
They moved
At
San
some point, they bought the cabin, and
Yeah.
it seems to me at first they went back and forth from Laverne, but not too many years. They moved into San Diego area, and they could go up a lot easier to go up there. I wanted to say that Grandpa, W.T., he was a farmer, but as I understand it, that wasn't really enough for his growing family income. So he was a Finnish carpenter, they call it, not a
Well,
carpenter.
that was his profession, though.
And-
Farming was on the side, just
Yeah,
to keep things
and
going.
he did beautiful cabinet
Yeah.
work and stuff, and I think a lot of the boys, at least my dad, picked up a lot of carpentry skills from him that they might not have if their dad had been, say, a school teacher or gardener. And so when I was at Chaffey Junior College in Ontario, one day I had a chat, which I didn't usually, with the college president, and he was a nice guy, but he had a buck teeth, so I'm afraid the students refer to him as squirrely teeth. I didn't tell him that. But one day we were talking, and he said what was my name, and told him it's Lois Butterfield. He said, we're from this valley, and we had this wonderful family with all these children, and the man's name was W.T. Butterfield. Would you know anything about that?
No.
And I said, oh, that was my grandpa. Well, this set squirrely teeth, squirrely tooth, it was squirrely tooth. Don't tell him. He said, my folks were building a new house, and he was their Finnish carpenter. He said he was the best carpenter in all Pomona Valley. And of course, I loved hearing, I don't know if he was or not, but I sure thought that was neat. And so after that, he always gave me a big smile.
What's his name, Robert?
Mr. Booth, I don't know what his
Booth,
first
okay.
name was.
Other than squirrely tooth.
That's you remember, not.
Because I
Well,
don't
didn't
remember, because
Grandpa
it was Chaffey,
help
but-
build the church there in Chino?
He could have.
Right.
Oh, he did,
Oh,
he
yeah.
did, we know he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but it's been wonderful through the years, and now and then other people come to me and we lose some of you or some of your parents or some of my parents or something, and it's kind of a wonderful heritage.
Well, about Grandpa Butterfield, W.T. being a carpenter, he was a professional carpenter all his life. When they came to Chino, and there was a company who came to Chino and encouraged all the farmers to grow sugar beets. And it was a family's named Oxnard, and they put up their plant there. And Grandpa was the maintenance crew to keep all the plant running for years and years. There's lots of records of that. And most of the boys worked at the sugar beet family, either in the field, topping beets, or worked at the family. And was it Clarence that got burned? Or
No, that was Dad. That was my
was-
dad.
was- Oh, she
Yeah,
did.
one of the big vats of sugar
Yeah.
was gonna boil over,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and he ran in there
Yeah.
Turn it off.
to turn it off, and he had overalls on,
Yeah.
Filled his pocket
and it
with.
filled his pocket so that his thighs were
Yeah.
burnt so badly that he
Yeah.
said he used to bang his head on the wall because
Oh, it hurts
just
bad.
because of the pain.
Of course, those were the days before any safety measures and
Or
everything.
I don't know
Lucky
how
to die of
I don't know
infection or
how
something.
he survived that.
Well, the sugar beet factory was a very important part of Chino history. And there was a time when the sugar beets used so much nutrients out of the soil that the soil wasn't much getting good anymore. And the Oxnard family took their plant all apart and they moved it to a place in middle California.
Near
And they
Ventura.
named the town
Oxnard.
Oxnard, yeah.
That's where I did my first 2 years of teaching, was in Oxnard.
Yeah. So that's a part of the Chino history. Now the soil's back in condition again.
Oh, yeah, now we're
But
back.
that's part of our family, the sugar beet thing. Well, Grandpa was their maintenance man for a long
Oh, I
time.
didn't
Oh, yeah.
realize that.
Well, I saved a few of the writings, and we were passing around Alice's poetry, and I noticed in W.T.'s diary he saved poetry, whether he wrote it himself or whether they're favorite poems. So we have the woodworking, we have the gardening, we have the appreciation for nature, and the whole Boy Scout thing, and the whole family thing, and then the poetry thing. And here's a little thing that Oliver published, and I'm sure he taped them all up himself, stapled them together, and they're typed on an old typewriter. And so we've had this around and used the poems various times. The one particular one that's marked here is, we think it's about Mercy. And Oliver and Mercy had a very close relationship that was very obvious to us that they really lived this thing of equality and whatever. And
To everybody.
when during the women's movement, when people were talking about independent women and women who are not subject to their husband and so on and so forth, Kathy and I kind of looked at each other and went, is there any other way to be besides independence and equal? Because we saw our parents growing up that way. And my mom tells sort of horror stories about how her mom could never talk about sex or about dating or anything, to the point that, when she went to gym class for the first time, she was just so shy and embarrassed that she had all this hair, and she was very frightened that someone would see this, because she didn't know that everybody had it. It was just very tragic almost. Anyway, so that when she married Dad and got acquainted with this Butterfield family and their feelings about how natural and wonderful relationships were and so on and so forth, she made sure that whenever we mentioned anything about sex or any questions that we had with small children, we got this lot of
More than we ever wanted to know.
more than we ever wanted to know. Anyway, but this poem that's it's titled Love, and it's just, to us it really speaks of, because we only knew him when he was old and looked like that mostly, because this is when I was just barely 2 years old. I blew it up from a picture. So I mostly remember, Grandpa's big hands and sitting on his lap and taking us on hikes and teaching us about stink bugs. And it was just funny. We would just watch them, and he had the patience to just let us do that. And he would make funny animals out of driftwood, and just pass that around.
I thought you were going to read the poem for us.
Well, I'm not sure I could.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought,
The family tree will come forward.
We had
Juliet
at
will be-
Dorothy's birthday party, Lynn started to read
and actually,
a letter that Dad wrote, and she
Oh, they
couldn't
never told
Yeah.
couldn't finish it.
Yeah.
She got all teary-eyed.
I'll read the first two stanzas and then because that may happen to me too. I haven't read as much of Grandpa's poems as they have. So, titled Love, says, I loved you when I saw you walking down the street, head up, intent on going, I know not where, but glad. I loved you when I saw you smiling at your friends and watched you, courteous and sincere. And it goes on like that. It's very pretty. So I'll pass it around.
Okay.
and then, why don't you read the last?
The very last one? Okay, I'll read. The last stanza is, and I may love you through the years, so close, so true, so constantly, that when the sunset comes, not even death shall part us far. It's very sweet.
And it's sort of continuing with the writing thing. We discovered at some point some old, yellowed, typed sermons and speeches that he had done. And we copied them, and my brother was going to school to be a nurse just about the time he was 40, I think. And for some reason, we thought that he needed copies of these. So they're really fun to read and interesting. He had all these sort of, this is in the 30s and 40s, I believe, sort of amazing, forward-thinking things. And he suggested things about families like, remember that homes are not art museums, and he kind of carries on from there, do not care how your furniture is, and your children should have fun and so on. And then a home is not a hospital, and he says home is not a courtroom or a reformatory. He really was very adamant that people should have fun with their children. And he says, show your children affection, have fun with your children, maintain consistent discipline, develop independent children. And I think this really speaks of his heritage, and that I think William T. and Mary Lou really developed very independent children, but also cooperative and supportive. And I thought a very appropriate one for this time of the year is when democracy begins at home. And he says, democracy will not work and it cannot survive unless 3 rights are preserved. And these rights are likewise obligations or duties. The first of these is the right to complain. And it goes on and on. Life begins with complaint, he said. No complaint, no life. No complaining is allowed in totalitarian countries. Only cowards or ignoramuses refuse to complain against wrong. And he goes on and on and on. He said, in democracy, complaining is a fine art. And he goes on with that. The second obligation of citizens in a democracy is to learn, and to learn to complain intelligently. Criticism plus information equals roads and sports and so on. He says, a 3-month-old infant cries and then listens. So it's just kind of interesting stuff. New problems demand new solutions. And he says, children come to despise parents who will not learn. Unless we keep open minds and fresh view on life, we cannot expect our children to follow our ways or to obey us. And I just think, wow, oh gosh, I wish he lived long enough for me to talk to him about some of these things.
Yeah.
Let's see, the third obligation or right in a democracy, without neither complaining or learning is of any avail. To complain of evils is not a cure. To know of evils and how to cure them is not enough. It takes cooperation. So that's the third thing. To complain, to learn, and to cooperate. So those are all the. He says, why do we have so little cooperation? Too little cooperation at home. He says, when father helps mother with the dishes, when mother helps father repair the auto or keep the books, and cooperatively care for the children and cooperative discipline, and cooperation in religious observance, cooperative fun. Cooperation is based upon mutual concern, sharing efforts, seldom on equality of ability. In totalitarian government, no one asks you, will you? In a Christian brotherhood, we depend upon goodwill, not authority. We cannot beat our children into goodness. Fear always fails. You can learn to respect a child's interests, and if you do, you will cooperate. Education, anyway, I thought that was just really interesting, and there's a whole bunch more.
Well, I thought it was very interesting that Dad and Mother were up in Palomar, and he was working on remodeling the cottage next door when he died. Mother was about noontime, and Mercy had lunch already. She called to him, and there wasn't any answer at all. She called again, and so finally she went over there where he was working on a plumbing activity, and he was drilling a hole by hand with a bit and auger to make some room there, and she found him all collapsed over the drill there, and he just passed away with a heart attack. And she was desperate. She was that was so unexpected for her. She didn't have any inclination, and she ran all over the neighborhood and really exhausted herself. And Lois could tell you better about it. Anyway, she had a lot of physical trouble after that because she strained her heart quite a bit. Isn't that right? But Mother finally died. Was in a retirement home called Wesley Palms, just at the time they had all their big financial crisis. So Dad passed away quietly. And
How old was he when he passed away?
what?
How old was he?
71.
71.
Unfortunately, almost 71.
Yeah, he just been to our house the week before to celebrate Juliet's first birthday. And then they were going to spend
And
this
she was
week.
the baby.
She was the week in, they're going to spend a week or so up at Palomar working on whatever there was
He
to
was
work
living in
on.
the shower.
And
Something like that, that kind of plumbing.
so I got this call about, let's see, he died on a Wednesday. I forget, anyway, what happened was they didn't have a phone. We'd had one for a while just to try it out, but unless you kept it going for 3 or 4 months, it wasn't worth the expense if you weren't there regularly. The people next door lived there, and they did have a phone, and they said to my mother, anytime you need to use the phone and we aren't here, the key is always so-and-so. Well, of course, that day, the key wasn't there.
Oh dear.
And it was over 5,000 feet up there a
Oh.
little bit, and so she didn't breathe probably too easily anyway, but when you're panicky, you know, where your breath goes, but it goes. So she started walking up and down these hilly things looking for somebody. Well, she wanted to go, it's about a mile down to the summit, we always say, because the first place people coming up the mountain can come, there's a place called the Summit with a little restaurant and service station and so forth. Nowadays there's also a post office and a general store. And they were very good friends with the man who ran that Mr. Thompson and his wife. She was trying to walk down to the summit, but she didn't think she could make it. And a man came along, here's another miracle, in a car who was just visiting that area for the weekend. And he said, can I help you? He said, would you mind telling Mr. Thompson at the general store that I need help, that my husband Oliver's either very sick or he's died. And so it wasn't more than 15 minutes before both Mr. and Mrs. Thompson came up. And they stayed with her, and he called the sheriff's department, or whoever he called it. Anyway, it turned out the sheriff's department sent up a car instead of a hearse or something. And they took Dad down to the Escondido hospital there. And I think Mrs. Thompson stayed with her till Mr. Thompson could close up the store and come back. And then they rode with her down
Grandma
there.
didn't drive?
No,
Grandma never,
she tried once and
she tried it once.
and turned into a bunch of boxes or something in
Oh,
front of the store.
she never drove.
So humiliated. The strange thing is my mother-in-law had about the same experience, Paul's mother, except that I think they had lots of crates of eggs in the car. She bumped up on, she made a U-turn or something and didn't do it just right, and bumped up on the curb and all the egg carts went all over, and I think one of the daughter had.
Our mother
And she
gave
was
up
so
too. We were too
humiliated that
nervous.
she didn't
Never
want
drove.
to try. Anyway, the doctors at the hospital said that probably Dad passed away right now, because Mom was, you know, she felt guilty, like maybe if I got in there in time, it could save me, but I don't know if they really knew. They just wondered if but they said never mind that he probably passed away.
What they call the coronary occlusion,
Yeah,
a bit of the
blood
plaque
clot.
breaks off and then it just stops the heart. The vivid memory I have was I was doing my first counselor in training thing. I was just graduated from high school and I went to Methodist Church camp and was being a counselor in training, and my the head of the camp was Frank Mouse, who was
You're kidding.
active.
He's the one that got me to rejoin the Methodist Church in Fullerton.
Yes.
Yeah, he was our
Frank.
assistant pastor there, and he said,
And
"Why don't you join the church? You come every week anyhow."
And I found out later that he also had baptized me.
Oh,
But he was
Frank
the one who
talk
baptized
about
me.
a
because
small
he was at
world.
Fallbrook.
And so he took
Oh,
me
yeah.
onto a very leaf-covered hillside. I remember there were oak trees and stuff. And he told me that Grandpa died. And it was so wonderful to have somebody who knew him
Oh,
and who loved him. And it was a great, great experience. Very vivid memory. So, and then Grandma came and stayed with us. Or I stayed with her for a while. And I was so amazed because she was so, the one thing I remember about them was they always had tea in the afternoon. And there would be, cut up different pastries and cookies and things. And juice. Grandma used to put different juice together because you never got rid of that last bit of juice. And there would be tea, and also in the morning there were always devotions, the upper room or some reading some Bible or something and talking about it a little bit. And these just seemed like the most amazing things to me, these simple kinds of rituals and fun sharing, and of course table games and all the game things, and that life was interesting. and fun, and there's always something, some hobby thing or some, of course the garden and all the other kinds of things. It's just an amazing legacy. But I remember we had bunk beds, and I was proud. Of course, I was just out of high school and maybe going to junior college. But Grandma came and lived with us for just a little while after or before. I don't remember. She went to Wesley Palms anyway. I woke up in the night, and she was on the bottom bunk, and I was on the top bunk. Kathy was off somewhere else, I guess. And I heard her praying in the night, and she prayed, not to be a burden, to hold her hand, to help me to, and this was when she just wasn't sure what she was going to do, because she and Oliver were such a team. And it was,
She never picked out a dress without him being there.
yeah,
She was just shocked.
yeah, they were very, 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 very close, and it was an amazing experience. And I always remembered, this hearing her pray these prayers for, and to me it symbolized the whole sort of Butterfield family thing, that you worked hard and you helped out and you all these positive sorts of
And you did your duty.
Yes, you really did.
And I think there's just a real strong feeling in the whole Butterfield family that you have a duty and a responsibility for what you're supposed to
Well,
do.
and the family thing too, it's just taken for granted. There would be reunions and you'd be happy to see each other, and that there was value in each other, and
Well, the other thing that I see in all the Butterfields that come together is this lifelong education. And a lot of us have been teachers and things related to that. And I know, always talking about Grandpa, W.T., how he never went to school very far, but he valued education so much and made sure most of his kids, went way ahead of anybody else in that time of school. I mean, how many families that size, and the great majority of them graduated from college. And I remember about him reading the National Geographic. That was one of
Yes, I used to love to look at those.
important.
I have 45 or 50 years of the National Geographic because of WT, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But that sort of sense of learning what's really important about education, and that is not just memorizing things, but learning things and putting them into practice. And the other thing I'm really noticing this weekend and thinking it's such a valuable thing, and a lot of other people just don't have this, is storytelling. I mean, who doesn't love to tell stories? And Grandpa, his stories, and not knowing where some of them came from, like, I can remember being at Palomar, and that was such a treasured time for us as little kids. And soon I have 2 younger brothers, and they used to come, especially Bill, he was older. And Grandpa and Grandma, between the two of them, would just keep us going with stories. And Grandpa would tell this story about the bed bugs, and we didn't know really what he was talking about. But we would laugh so hard, we'd be rolling on the floor, and tears would be coming down, and it was just such a great thing. But he was a real storyteller.
Another favorite story he made up, I can't remember, but what was about Zimmy and Zoomy the mosquitoes.
all these sort of nature-related things that he...
One of the fun stories that we kind of laugh about was when Ina was in the hospital in Covina. This is during the war. She was having Kirk. Kirk was the baby.
Wasn't during the war, Dad.
She was a rather large person, and our babies are always 9 or 10 pounds. Kirk was so big they didn't have a bassinet big enough for him, and they put him in a dresser drawer with pillows around him and stuff, and he was the baby.
10.5 pounds.
Well, just about this time, a whole group of student nurses came from Mount San Antonio College, and their duties and responsibilities was to learn how to take blood pressure and pulses and so forth. So these girls started to come in, they 1 and 2 and 3, and they understood that it was their student responsibility. But when they got to be 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, pretty well, how many was it? 12? 12 girls came in, and she said, "Funny, what is going on here?" And she says, "Well, Dr. Butterfield tells us so much about his grandchildren. We want to see if you have any pictures of his grandchildren."
And you had to see the baby.
Oh, they had to see the baby.
They had to see the baby.
But he told all about this, in his classes. He was part of the instructor of the nurses training program at Mount Sac, and he was kind of managing the scene that.
The family studies.
Yeah, family studies.
Well, my story that goes along with that was when I went on a Methodist church. In the late 60s, they started organizing, early 60s, backpacking trips. for camps for older students. And so you'd have high school camp, and then you could go backpacking. And didn't I meet you in one of those? I think so. But the real story was there was a redheaded guy there, and there were probably maybe just 20 of us in the group, so we talked a lot. And when I said my name, I was still Butterfield then, and he kind of kept looking at me, and pretty soon he just burst out with, "You're little Susie!" You know. And when he took, you have to take this marriage and family course as part of your orientation and your basic general education. And he said, "Oh, you just told us so many wonderful stories about little Susie." Oh my goodness. Like 19 years old. Like, oh. Because this was little Susie here with the sausage arms and stuff.
One remarkable thing happened after my dad died and they got him to Escondido to the hospital. Mother being a preacher's wife and also a lifelong church person, it's common, you know, when somebody close dies, you call your minister. Well, here she was in Escondido. It wasn't her town. She wasn't in Laverne. She wasn't in La Mesa where they knew the men. But the minister at that time at the Methodist Church in Escondido was a young man named something. I want to say another name. That's not it. Anyway, a young man that they had known as minister in Laverne, and in fact they were very fond of this young man. They thought he was going to have a wonderful ministry, and he did. He was the man, only man she knew, minister in Escondido, and she called him from the hospital, and he came over, and he ended up helping with Dad's service the next week. But I thought, well, how wonderful that somebody that she really knew and loved and believed in anyway could be a much more comfort to her than a stranger, even a Methodist minister stranger. Or any stranger. But
Well, it's hard to find one
I
of
thought
those,
that was
you know.
just serendipity.
We were always thankful that Dad died with his boots on.
Yeah, right.
Because he never
You bet.
would have been happy, and he actually did die with his